Hey, I'm Dale Reiser. We are residents of Crown Point. I've been attending Suncrest for about 4 years or so. We've been married for 47 years, and I want to introduce you to my wife of 47 years.
And I am Maureen. We have 3 children ranging in age from 40 down to 36, 6 grandkids, and are just kind of loving the empty nest syndrome that we're going through right now, but at the same time enjoying our kids and grandkids a lot.
Awesome. Thank you.
We are Josh and Melissa Niemeyer. We've been married for 12 years. We've got 3 kids. Their names are Emma, Thad, and Cyrus.
They're 8, 6, and 4.
Very good. In the middle of raising kids.
Mm.
We are Elliot and Chelsea Burrell. We currently have no kids.
Married for 5 years. And for the first 2 of those years, Elliot was in the Navy. So we were moving around quite a bit and like through deployments. But for the past a little over 3 years, we've been here back in Northwest Indiana.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you joining us. I think it'll be a big help to a number of married couples in our church, and who will find us online. So I prepped you with a couple of questions. So I'm just going to toss this out there, and you got to jump in. Kind of have to go for it. So what are 1 or 2 habits or practices or attitudes that have been most important for your marriage to be happy and healthy?
Well, I'll go ahead and say that I think for us, being the seasoned veterans that we are, finding time for each other is really important. And those are some of the things that we talk about a lot in our marriage coaching classes, that life can get considerably busy. And we certainly end up maybe not finding the time that we need to be able to just spend together. And it doesn't have to be elaborate get-togethers. It could be simple things like we have a home in Wisconsin, and several days up in Wisconsin, we're clearing trees off of the property or painting walls. We turn on some really good music and just start painting walls. So I think just spending quality time, finding the time to be able to spend with each other is important, and especially for younger couples as their kids, continue to keep them busy.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Did you, when you were younger and your kids were growing up, did you have a rhythm or a discipline or a date night or anything like that? Or how did you keep that going with the quality time?
It's a really good question. As Maureen said, it doesn't need to be something elaborate. Yes, we made time to be out to dinner. We, especially with other friends as well, made really close relationships with our small group at church, for example. And that continued into late into life to this very day. And it's been cool. It's been really great.
I think also that times have changed a little bit, where so many times both spouses are working, and I was able to not have to work. And so I think that, trying to find that quality time, especially in younger couples raising kids, it's a little bit more difficult. So it's harder for you to find that time, but it's important.
Yeah. All right, somebody else. Habits, practices, attitudes.
So one of the things that Melissa and I started doing right away when we got married is sitting at the table and having dinner together every night. And that's something that we've never stopped doing. And it's looked different. I mean, when you're just a young married couple, life's a little bit more predictable at that point. We knew when we would be getting home from work, and we didn't have so many extracurriculars. But even with kids now, we make time for it. I mean, there's nights that we eat dinner at 4:30 because we've got commitments at 6. So Melissa's got it ready for us. And it's just a really great time when we just get to kind of debrief the day and talk about the different relationships that we interacted with throughout the day, whether it's our parents or neighborhood friends, coworkers, things like that. It really has been that unscheduled time of, just being able to think over the day and share with each other what's going on. So.
That's awesome. Hey, because of the tornado warning, I'm moving into a separate room right now. Just bear with me here. So I heard like you'll totally adjust when you eat dinner so you can eat dinner.
Definitely. So we have church on Thursday nights, right? Sometimes every third week I'm on worship team. So we would eat dinner quite a bit earlier. It was usually like 4:15 on Thursday nights. That way I could get to church in time for run through, but we still happen to make time for the five of us to sit around the table and, just hash out the day. So,
and we, like you said, we just started that when we started, like when we first got married.
Right.
And it wasn't in front of the TV. It was always at the table.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe not always, but almost always at the table.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's no TV, no phones, no all those distractions. Right. All right, Burrells, what do you think?
First, I just want to say, when Elliot and I were talking, we were really excited to hear from you guys because we figured we would be the youngest couple on here. We're like, okay, obviously they're middle age. So we have kind of a weird tradition that we started right after we moved back to Northwest Indiana. So I started a new job, and every year at my company, they do a state of the company address, which is just a webinar that tells, where we are financially, where we are with turnover, where we are with clients. And so I was sitting in this meeting and I thought, we should do that. We should have a state of the Burrell Union. And so I proposed the idea to Elliot and he said, okay, yeah. And so we started talking about these different areas. So the very first time we sat down, we had just bought a house. We just moved back to Northwest Indiana. Most of our house was empty. We had so much to do. And so we do this now every quarter, so every 3 months. It's a little more formal. But we talk about our finances. So the 5 areas are finance, which includes investing for retirement, the stock market. It includes our budget that we, what we spend our money on. Then there's household, which includes things that need to be done for the house. It started with, we need to buy these things. But it's also distribution of chores. Do we feel like there's an even balance there? The third is social leisure, which is birthdays, holidays, family vacations, planning and prioritizing those. Or, we really want to get to know our neighbor. Let's go, ask them for dinner. Family, which initially was just me and Elliot. So talking about our marriage, our relationship, how that's going, date nights, things like that. That it include training for our dog. And then the topic of kids would always come up in there. And then the last one's personal goals, which is just so that we could prioritize what's important to us and still, be able to prioritize that in each other. And so we've been doing this now for the past 3 years, every 3 months. And I think it has made such a big difference in our life. Instead of, I have a problem and now I'm going to ask to sit down with Elliot and talk to him. It's something we regularly talk about. We regularly talk about our finances. We regularly talk about our marriage. We regularly talk about those personal goals. So.
Yeah, it's a really good way to keep communication open, especially on big picture items. And it never feels forced or awkward to bring up because it's a regular thing. Every 3 months, we evaluate where we are on giving the Suncrest or, who's doing the most dishes and seeing if we feel uncomfortable or we want to just address it. And it's a low stress, big picture way to talk about it. And we kind of have fun with it, dress up, we have hors d'oeuvres, just kind of make a show of
it. So Burrells, you might think I chose you because you're the youngest and childless at this stage, but I actually chose you because I knew that was going to be your answer. I've heard this from Elliot before. And if you didn't tell everyone that you dressed up for it and make a big deal out of it, I was going to out you. So now the whole world knows. But those 5 categories, how golden is that to say, we're going to have a substantial conversation about our marriage and about our life on a regular rhythm. And I love it. I love it. So I'm curious, before I jump to question number 2, if there are other things that popped up for you, either habits or practices you have of any of you, or something you want to comment on from someone else.
We had one more thing that we talked about that, again, started when we were dating and has just carried through our marriage, but the habit of serving together. We've done that in formal ways, in like formal ministry position, not like, pastors, but like we've served on worship teams, or we've served on, in different ministries within the church together. Since we were dating, and then when we first got married, and sometimes it's been more informal. We just showed up and helped your dad roof the garage, or we, host people in our homes regularly, things like that. But the idea of serving actually together for some sort of common goal, even like what you guys were saying with just painting or clearing trees together, that side-by-side work has been real formative for our marriage.
For sure.
And I think Melissa and both Elliot, you both made comments that strike a chord with us. I think the serving together in the church, I can't begin to tell you how many different areas over the years, but it was together. And it really molded who we were as a couple in the Lord. And then Elliot setting these goals, such as you talked about. Oh my gosh, Maureen would probably just kind of roll her eyes all night long. But
you definitely speak the same language here, Elliot and Dale. Absolutely.
What's really cool is when those goals begin to come to fruition and we see things coming together that maybe not in the exact form that we had hoped that they might, that we were planning for them to, but to see that they are happening because either we bathed it in prayer or have been working in a particular direction to get there. And it just makes marriage fun, So.
Yeah.
And I think going at, no matter what the situation is, and, through 46 years of marriage, there have been plenty of ups and downs. And, I think that is one thing that when we got married, you see so many divorces nowadays. Never once was there ever the thought of like, we're not going to make this. And I mean, the divorce word was never, that was just not even in the cards. I made a commitment to Dale and I made a commitment to God that this is the guy that I'm going to be with for the rest of my life. There may be some rough times, but that's okay in so many ways. But yet, I couldn't see myself with anybody else either.
Yeah. Billy Graham's wife famously said, she never considered divorce. She did consider murder, but never divorce.
I haven't even considered that. Haven't considered that.
I think Kelsey and I we have this. A lot of times people will say that like compromise is like, you got to meet each other halfway or 50-50. And I think we've always tried to take a view that compromise sometimes means you go 100%. Like, you might want to meet in the middle, but something's important to your spouse, and you're gonna go all the way. You're not gonna meet in the middle. You're gonna go all the way with it. And it helps one to have similar values so that you're never really challenged on an important value. And then you realize anything that's not a value, it's not for the person that you're married to. Going 100%. Really?
It's really interesting. You mentioned the 50-50. We just in a marriage session here, coaching session the other night, we talked about the concept young couples come to marriage with is it's a 50-50 proposition. That's a fallacy in the sense that your talent might be 90% in a particular area, whereas your wife's or your spouse's is 10%. And the compromise that you mentioned, Elliot, is the key. And through that, then there's the success of whatever the goal or activity is to get to 100%. And I think the other concept for if there's a single listening to this, to think that we come to a marriage to fix all of our problems, that is your spouse will cause for them to go away, is not a realistic, it's just not a realistic concept. And if we come to that reality in advance of together we work through it, and there's a lot of wins along the way because of that. So
50-50 proposition basically is saying to your spouse that I'm only wanting half of you, because the 50-50 is making up the 100%, so, and I would assume that would probably be the good half that you're wanting to constantly shine through.
Yep. All right, I'm going to move us to question number 2. So this question is, where have you found yourself putting unrealistic expectations on your spouse over the course of your marriage? So we may need to hear from all 6 individuals here. But yeah, jump in. Who's got an answer to that?
All right, I'll go.
Thinking.
This is the harder one. For me, one thing that I feel like I have done in our marriage on and off is just the amount, and actually we're just kind of talking about this, but the amount of pressure that I've put on Josh to deal with my insecurities. And not to say that he's not a great help with that, because he is, in the way that he encourages me, the way that he compliments me, even though I'm terrible at receiving compliments. I'm really bad at receiving compliments, but he tries. And so, but the way that he requires our children to talk to me respectfully, the movies that he watches and doesn't watch, the way that he trusts and respects me, even with silly things like when we bought a boat and I had never driven a boat before, and first day out on the water, he's having me drive the boat. And, that speaks to, the way that he trusts me and respects me, and this is a team thing. And so, obviously he helps with, insecurities and things like that. But as far as like my self-worth and all that has to come from Christ. And I have to take those insecurities to Christ, because trying to have Josh deal with those is just unfair. And so that's something I'm not going to be enough for her. Mm-hmm. That's just humanity. So like what she's saying, the fact that she recognizes bringing what she feels like she doesn't have to Christ is a huge relief to me, because heaven knows I'm going to fail if it's up to me. Right. So,
yeah.
So I would agree. This was the hardest question, because we're sitting across the table like, I don't know, like, what do you think? Right. And I think there was certainly a time, I think, in the military where he was mostly deployed and we kind of learned to live separate lives. And we both dealt with that very differently. Like I became more isolated. I just became more independent. So when we came back to Northwest Indiana, there were some things that, like, I hate to ask for help. I am somebody who, like, team leader, you know what I mean? And so at home like that, I would just take on everything. And I think I wanted help and I didn't ask for it. And if I don't ask for it, he's not a mind reader. And it's you can't put those expectations on somebody. And I think that's where, like, in that way, State of the Union helped, where it was something we constantly readdress, because I have trouble asking for help.
For us, I found decision-making, the timing of being able to come from a concept to final decision, we were just miles apart. And I've got a list, let's get it checked off so the decision is made and we move on. And recognize that's not Maureen's style. We need to think it through at a little deeper level. And I'm trying to be cautious as to how I put that. But the reality of it is that we really do look at it differently, and recognizing that and allowing for each of us to come to a decision or to decide against or for something by virtue of having thought it through. So that's probably been one of the more challenging things, I think, for us in marriage. And that, when we talk with our marriage coaching couples, to this day, and some days, even the day of the marriage coaching session, it has occurred. So there are ongoing circumstances such as that we continue to learn.
Elliot, did you want to finish up your couple?
Sure. Sorry, I keep on looking outside to see.
I know.
We're hearing sirens.
Not moved to the basement yet.
Yeah.
So we're like, as we hear the sirens,
So I think when we got married, I had a different expectation of what our intimacy would look like, and when you have an expectation and you don't communicate what that is, that means you're basically asking the other person for something that they have no idea that they're being asked for, or or that you have any, issue with. And so I State of the Union helped us, in our relationship portion. We were able to figure out, like, what was I looking for? What was she looking for? And it helped us communicate more realistically on a day-to-day basis, even though it was like, something we did every 3 months and to check up how we felt about that. But yeah, I had a set of expectations for what our intimacy would look like. And it was originally something I hadn't done a very good job of communicating at all. And it was a very unfair position to put her in because she wasn't even entirely sure she was there.
Yeah. For me, maybe it's because we've just been married for so long and I can't remember for so many years. I can't really say that there was any expectation that I had of Dale that jumps out that was something that wore on me. I just kind of think about when we were in college, we took a marriage class, and they would
secular university, by the way. So,
yeah, and one of the things that they talked about was they labeled them was tremendous trifles, and basically what it was are just those little things that just eat the living daylights out of you. And I think just like I said, I can't think of any expectation that I had of Dale that he has not fulfilled. It could have been something that bothered me for a short period of time, but it was kind of like, really, in the grand scheme of things, how much does this really matter? And then we moved on to another chapter of life. So, as lame as that may sound, I guess that's
big deal.
So going into marriage, I remember Melissa and I both talking with both of our parents and just watching them, both of our parents in their marriages. They had real life marriages, and it was really interesting to see how communication is what it really boils down to for so many different things. And one of the things Melissa and I did that I feel like kind of helped us avoid some of those unspoken expectations was just having, like, we had literal discussions about, like, what are your default responsibilities? What are which all of you have talked about up to this point. Like, there's things that you can, just through communicating up front, you can avoid, hidden heartache and hidden, bitterness towards the other person. If you just know up front, like, yeah, this is something that I'm going to do all the time, and this is something, you communicate through it. But if you can hash that out in the beginning, it just makes everything so much smoother. So
Chelsea and I are hoping to have kids soon. And one of the things that we've started doing is talking about the ways in which we were raised and the way, the approach that we want to take raising our kids. And sometimes we'll come up with mock scenarios and things like that. But I think it's really valuable for us to see where the other one stands and solve, the inconsistencies aren't necessarily like one's good and one's bad. It's just, figuring out how we can be on the same page before we do have a child and try to get as much of that out of the way as we can. Though I'm sure, as everybody else here can attest, there's a lot of unpredictability in that we'll just have to figure out as we do it.
One thing that I will always tell our marriage coaching couples, is the fact that I kind of wish that we had something like that back in the day when we got married. I mean, there really wasn't anything. We were married in the Catholic Church, and there was a pre-Cana conference that we sat down and spoke with a priest for about, 10 minutes, and that was it. And, as we have taught this class, there are things that we have learned or that we look back on our years and like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense. Like, we are the product of, two separate groups of parents, and you bring the philosophies of two different families together, assuming that the other one's going to accept it. And we're like, well, no, and I'm sure you all have talked about, well, does the toilet paper roll go one way or the other? Well, in our house, we did that. Or, holiday traditions. It's, the book, the class talks about the fact that, there will be no other couple like you are. You are the one and only Mr. and Mrs. Reiser, the thing. And it continues to be a learning process. Correct?
Yes, ma'am, it does. Yes, it does. And I would say, Ellie, you touched on talking about how you would handle kids in advance. If they're, God's blessed in so many ways, but the primary way for us to have adult children who are all believers, who are raising their kids as believers. I got to tell you, no matter what ever should happen, there's the biggest win we could ever possibly expect. And it's just a joy. And man, it takes work and it takes commitment. And I see Greg shaking his head. He certainly knows that. And no regrets, none whatsoever. Yeah. It's all worth the effort. Yep.
Yeah. I hear a little bit of a theme here about, we should all in our marriages pay attention to what we brought into it, right? Some of that's our own identity. Everyone, even if you don't think your parents had a good marriage, it's still what was normal to you,
exactly.
Right? So we're all making those adjustments. Mm-hmm. And then I know for Jenny and I, we grew up in a rural part of Illinois. So, some people would call it Hickville. I just acknowledge it's a few years behind what suburban Chicago is.
That's what it is, Greg.
And what it means is more traditional family forms were what I grew up with, right? So, but then I put Jenny in a situation where my mom stayed home and raised us. Now, Jenny didn't, she stayed home for a while, but then worked. I still had all the same expectations on her, even when she went to work, just because it was embedded. So that mind reading stuff, we just have a few minutes left here, but an off-script question, okay? So mind reading, you guys all kind of talk about leaning into those conversations and how important that is. But was there a time in your marriages, because I think a lot of marriages have trouble leaning into those conversations. And you think back before we figured out that we needed to have a State of the Union or whatever it is, about how hard that was and how you changed it or what prompted the change? Anything on that?
One thing that I say to friends of ours, my family, when we talk to them, and I quote you on this, Greg, all the time, is that life is on the other side of awkward. And that is totally the case when it comes to these mind reading type situations. It's going to be terrible for a minute. It might be really awkward, but you know what? It's going to be maybe it'll even take a day or a week or a little while for us to get through this, but it will get better. So that I am a firm believer in that.
I was just going to say, I know, when we were in the military, I think I mentioned, it was really hard for me. I like to say that there's people who are built for the military, people who, they're okay with it, and then people who are not. I was not. And I struggled a lot. My default is to kind of shut down and to not ask for help, to not share what I'm feeling. I'm not a touchy-feely, emotional person. But I think what eventually made me open up a little bit more is, you think about where you want to be, and you think about what's important to you. And I don't want to be 3 years from now still struggling, or I don't want to be 3 years from now still trying to do this on my own. I chose Elliot, and he is a wonderful, wonderful person who is kind and thoughtful, and he's there, and wanting to be there. And, and I just had to think about what do I want? And it's, and it's Ellie, and you can't do this life alone, you have people on your side to support you if you let them in. And, and so I think it was just, there was enough of it's at the end of me, right? There's God, there's Elliot, there's these people, there's these things in your life where, resources that you have,
Yeah. When we talk about whether it's the awkward or, that potential of pulling away, if you really think about what are your other options, right? Besides leaning into these conversations, naming some things that you're asking for a reminder, I mean, the only two other options are to get out of the marriage, which is a horrible option, or to live in a marriage without those conversations. And, I think for, happy, healthy marriages, it's because you're willing to lean into the awkward pieces.
Discord can really be a very positive thing. The fact that I think one of the chapters I remember talking about is fighting a good fight, learning how to communicate through something. And I think, Ellie, you said it might take a week. It might take a little time for the pot to stop boiling, so to speak. But the reality is you are a much stronger couple on the other side of that working through the disagreement. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, let me do a little commercial here at the end. Groups at Suncrest. So, the Risers have talked about they do our pre-marriage coaching. That's awesome. I know the Neimeyer's in a group. I know Chelsea and Elliot, you're each in your women's group and men's group together, but that outlet for marriages and friendships, I think helps our marriages also. So I assume you all would agree with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. If you want a group, email jamie.ward@suncrest.org. That's the right way to get connected. And we're actually starting a short-term couples experience, I think this week. So I want people to hop into that. So, hey, I appreciate all you guys hearing this, being vulnerable and honest with us and giving us a window into married life. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It was nice meeting you all.
Yeah. See you all.
See you around.
Take care.
Yeah, maybe on Saturday. I don't know if anyone's going to be around on Saturday, but we can make some introductions. All right. See you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Yeah.